our executive branch of government. So folks, if everybody wants to talk at once, we won't be able to continue. So the next branch is involved, of course, is the executive, and that's law enforcement. So the legislature also does not enforce the laws. The legislature passes the laws and crafts the laws and tries to do our best in providing a fair and just society for all of us. So I think we do need to keep those basics in mind, because it really is how the system works, and we're not taking questions from the floor. I'm sorry, but you can write down a card. And please, if you would like us to contact you, put your email or your phone on there, okay? Because we will do our best to get back to you sometime during the session, and if not, then after the session's over. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to tackle that question.
The question? Yeah, did you actually answer the question? Do you know what those bills are?
Where do rights come from? Not from the government.
That's right.
All right, I have another question.
Wait,
Excuse me, I'm
I'm
sorry.
not finished.
I'm sorry.
Really.
The teacher in me is going to just jump forward and say that shouting out is not going to be acceptable. It'd be really easy for us to say, it would be very easy to say we're not going to even conduct town hall meetings. We are here to listen and to have good interaction. You may agree, you may disagree. We may agree, we may disagree. But the lack of civility will not be tolerated. So what I will ask you to do is, again, if we want to have conversation, we can do that after we answer questions. And you are welcome to write down more, and we can follow up on it. But if we take time to answer each individual's questions right now, we will not be able to be as thorough as we'd like to be. And so again, please, just let's be civil, let's have good conversation, and let's listen to one another. And that is really what I'm asking us to do, please.
There'll be more. There will be more.
That question answers. All we got was a civics lesson. We would like the question answered. So I'm not trying to be confrontational here. Just answer the question. It wasn't answered.
The question was, how will HB 1274, SB 196, and others meet scrutiny of the Second Amendment standards?
Okay, I'll try one more time. The answer will come later from the courts.
Oh!
Whatever we pass has to go, or may go, to a court test. That is how our system
We'll
works.
find out what's in it later.
That-
Rights come from God, not from the court.
I think that by process, if all three of us answer, if you wanted all three of us to answer the same question, that's fine, but it would reduce the number of questions that we can fit into the time period. But I will answer the question is, the bills that were pertaining to the Second Amendment, the question was, how do they fit under the Second Amendment and support the Constitution in a way that the Constitution intended? And the general answer to that is that there are no unregulated constitutional rights. Every constitutional right that's in the Constitution has been subjected to reasonable regulation by, as it's interpreted by the government at the time that it's there. So the legislative branch's job is to base the laws that they're doing that are put there in the public interest and regulate those towards the aim of supporting the Constitution. And that's what the legislature did this time. The concern is about, I'm sorry, you can agree or disagree with whether or not we were successful. You asked what the process was of determining what was the constitutional responsibility. The legislature's constitutional responsibility is to provide for the public good consistent with our views of the Constitution. There are three branches of government. so that if the legislature does laws that they think are in the public interest of our society, and the governor disagrees, he can veto it. If the courts decide that it's unconstitutional, that it does not meet constitutional standards, then they can declare it unconstitutional. But the responsibility of the legislature is to decide what we can do to provide for the public good under that meets the constitutional standards. That's what they did with the bills that you're talking about. Now, I'm not certain which bills those were. I'm assuming that you're talking about the Second Amendment bills associated with guns. Those were different numbers that I'm aware of, but that's okay. That's what the role of the legislature was. That's what we did. And the rest of the process is still there to determine. If none of those legislative proposals have been passed yet. They've gone through the committee structure. They still have to go to the floor of the House of Representatives. They still have to be transferred to the Senate, and then they have to be signed by the governor, and then they have to meet constitutional muster. But the intent of the process was that we would provide legislative answers to what was determined to be the public good. That's the answer that we have.
And I'll answer that question as well as, and I just kind of pulled another one that asked for me to give my understanding of the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And basically what that says is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the rights of the people to keep, excuse me, the rights of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed upon. I defend that. I defend the Second Amendment. I think it is important that we know and understand what the different bills are that are being presented and what those different issues are. I'm in the Senate. I have not heard any of the bills yet. I don't sit on a committee that will hear the bills, but my intention is to go and sit in on the committees to really hear the testimony. One of the things that I think is so important, and I believe we all believe in this, it is important for us to hear the different views of the citizens of our state. You represent a portion. We also hear from people who are not in this room that give us different perspectives. There's no question, and I'm going to say this, and please hold your gasps and don't respond. There's no question that people are concerned about when there is a massacre, and that causes discomfort for everybody. In terms of, do we tighten up? Do we go after people who legally own arms and are responsible gun owners? Do we make drastic changes that affect things that go beyond? Or do we look at a way of approaching how we're going to work together in our society without the infringement on a few? And I think that is where we are as legislators. I very much look forward to, and I say this tongue in cheek, I look forward to hearing comments, but I will tell you that the number of emails that I get that say, don't take my Second Amendment rights away, mean so little to me in the sense of those that I hear from that explain, this is what it means, Senator Todd, when you talk about the number of clips for my hunting rifle. This is what it means when you talk about specifics in terms of concealed carry. When someone is very specific and takes the time to be very thorough in giving me understanding, giving me the background, and the same thing with my fellow legislators, that's when we can make decisions. And again, it may be a decision that you agree or disagree with, but I would tell you that this is not an easy discussion for anyone to have, and it is not the intent to make people feel like the government is coming after your right to bear arms. And I just want to stress that importance, that that is not the intent. The intent is to protect and in some cases how do we make sure that those of you that are law-abiding citizens, that are very responsible gun owners, are not feeling like your whole life has been turned upside down? And at the same time, give the protection to those who fear it the most. That is the toughest challenge in front of us. So with that being said, we'll go on to the next question.
Hold your applause and your comment. I'd ask you to sit down, please. Would you sit down, please?
Sit down, pal, sit down.
Sit down.
Okay, he asked that I begin by reciting the Second Amendment and give historical context and quotes by the framers. I can't do that. Okay, congratulations. Thank you.
We're going on to another question now. There are other people with other interests in this audience. The mental health hospital at Fort Logan has been degraded from 250 beds to 94. This is sad and dangerous and needs to be corrected. This is from Graham Witherspoon, whoever that is, but who would like to answer? Thank you. Okay, the mental health hospital at Fort Logan.
And Graham, if you'll stand up, and I want everyone to see this gentleman, because he has been such a strong advocate for mental health for our state. And I can guarantee you I get a weekly letter from Graham. He comes to all my town hall meetings. We've had many, many conversations, and very, very concerned about where we are with mental health funding. And if you had a chance to read in the Denver Post today from Don Mars, who's the president of Mental Health of America, and his concern is also extremely high in terms of how little money we fund mental health prevention services. When we talk about in our schools, we talk about in our communities, and making it available and accessible. And this is one of my big questions when we talk about, and again, I'm going to kind of circle around a little bit, because I know that after the shooting in Aurora, and Graham, can I share what you said to me? Are you,
Sure.
Okay. And he said, you know what? That could have been my son. That could have been my son, because he was schizophrenic, and he was in Fort Logan, and the number of beds that are continuing to decrease. And he said, we knew that he had mental health issues, and trying to get the services that were necessary and to keep him where he was under surveillance and protection, and getting services was a huge challenge. And he's no longer living now, but in terms of really fighting for mental health services. And I know many people and emails that I have gotten have said, let's look at the number of these mass shooters that were involved with Prozac or were on some antipsychotic drug. And so looking at that kind of service. The problem that we reach is when we don't have services available and people try to just go through life and function on their own, it escalates, and then oftentimes it does become a bigger problem. Now, the other thing I would want us to be very cautious in saying that not all mental illness leads to violence. We have many people walking around that suffer from mental illness that never cause harm to other people. And so when we look at what kinds of services we can provide and what kinds of treatment can be made available, that is extremely important. But if indeed we see that some people are prevented from buying a firearm because they are identified with mental health illness and behavioral health illness, then sometimes they won't go and get the help they need. So again, it's that dichotomy. My friends, that's what we are dealing with every day. It is not black and white. It is many, many different issues that come before us every day of trying to figure out how do we address and how do we meet the needs of so many people in our society. So I want to commend Graham for his hard work and dedication on mental health issues, but also we'll be glad to share the mic with other people.
Let's do another question.
Now here's a question that says, what happens when you are on the last tier of unemployment? My husband and I are retired veterans unable to get hired. Can the retirement age for guards and reserve be lowered to 55, no matter if you are technical or traditional. Who wants to answer that question?
This probably won't be a satisfactory answer, but it sounds like a more complicated question than we can answer right offhand. So I'd encourage whoever asked that question to see us afterwards, and we could get more information. When we're talking about military, and having Buckley Air Force Base in my district has given me a lot more exposure to the issues that face our military families. And we always have this, I wouldn't say conflict, but we have complicating issues with federal law, state law, and how those two mesh. And it's different for active duty, it's different for our guard, it's a very complicated matter. We do have an excellent Department of Military and Veterans Affairs at the state, and we send most of these questions to them, and I would say 99% at least come back with an answer, or whether it really solves the question. But that's how my bill to help the spouse of a disabled vet get those preference points, that came from a constituent who thought that might be a good idea to try, and lo and behold, nobody had done it yet. So that's how a lot of our ideas are generated. So I encourage whoever asked that question to see me afterwards. Thank you.
A short question. Has the proposal been passed that psychotherapists will not have to read their disclosure statements? Not sure if that. Okay, if that is that referred to the Aurora case, or psychotherapists?
No, right now psychotherapists, last sunset review, psychotherapists were required to read their disclosure statements to their clients, which.
Okay.
There was a proposal that we don't.
Thank you for clarifying your question. I don't believe that I've seen any legislation that has come forward on that. There is a kind of an omnibus bill on mental health issues that are coming through. It's starting in the House. Representative Beth McCann is the House sponsor, and I have asked her to please let me be a part of that, because I too have some very strong concerns about the way that we address mental health issues, and particularly in terms of I'll just make this little statement real quick. I believe that we are facing a very much of a culture of violence in our country. And unfortunately, we are reacting in different ways that make people very uncomfortable. Some people want to blame the movies. Some people want to blame video games. Some people want to blame gun owners. Some people want to blame the NRA. Some people want to blame Rocky Mountain gun owners. All of the different kinds of issues that are out there in terms of how we deal with. I think part of that is going back to the home, and going back to in terms of how do we address how much violence we tolerate and how much we become desensitized to. And so again, those are some bigger philosophical kinds of questions and issues to address, but I think that is part of what kind of permeates our society right now. And so that being said, in terms of being able to figure out how we get that. And so if you make sure I have your name and info, we can get that info and get it back to you. Thanks.
Okay, a lot of questions. Someone pointed out about the gun issue, obviously. I'm just going to pick one.
Oh my gosh, I'm surprised there's a bill or a question about guns. Thanks.
Okay, do you realize how vulnerable people in gun-free zones are? Do you know the vast majority of gun massacres have occurred in gun-free zones? Do you think criminals follow the laws? That's 3 questions there. And I'm going to give this to all 3 and see what they think.
I would assume that there are more gun-free zones than there are gun allowed zones. So, Well, now, when you say gun zones, it means that an area that restricts guns being, and even if you have a permit, there are places that you can't, and so that's what you're saying, like a school.
Right.
Right, I would concede that there are at least mass shootings or more in gun-free zones. But there are 33 people a day in the United States that die from gun violence. And so those, but, and now I'm saying is that the,
Speak, and then shut up.
you know, it's rare that I need assistance to speak. Because I'm not one of those people that gets run over very often. And I don't intend to start now. I'm way too old to change my personality. And regardless of whether or not I was voted into this position, I just don't get steamrolled very often. So what I was saying is that when we are, I'm not just concerned about the mass shootings that are there, and neither should our society be. We should be concerned about the safety and well-being of all of our citizens, gun owners, non-gun owners, kids, old people, middle-aged people. We should be striving for a society that respects human life. And so I don't think that there's one solution. I don't think that gun ownership or lack of gun ownership causes that to happen. I don't think that mental health and lack of mental health is the only answer. I don't think that economic success and economic stability is the only answer. I think all of those things contribute to a society that takes care of one another and makes it a safe and hospitable place for human beings to coexist. And you do what you can to accomplish those goals. You have the balance that's there. The reason we live here, the reason that we think America is the best place in the world, is we have the opportunity to have that input to determine what kind of society we want to live in. We don't have to agree. What we have to do is contribute. We are supposed to contribute to the well-being of each other and all others. And so when there's an opposition that says, I absolutely believe that I have to have 100 bullets in my gun in order for that to be, for the Second Amendment to be upheld, and somebody else believes that we ought to melt the gun and make it into something else, that's a pretty opposite positions, but they both are allowable in our society.
No.
They are both allowable in our society. I said the belief, not the law.
No.
The belief that...
Let him talk.
Hey, the belief that we don't need guns and we do need guns is allowable. The law allows us to believe both of those things and coexist. So there's going to be some compromise in order for 300 million people with all of those beliefs to live there. And we have to acknowledge that. If we don't acknowledge that if everybody that believes differently from you is wrong, we cannot solve the problems of America. And that's the point.
What do you do with those beliefs?
Now, here's a good question. What is the point of a town hall meeting if your constituents' voices are not allowed to be heard? Now, who in here thinks that everyone in here should be allowed to speak? Okay, let's just hand it around and the library will kick us out. But who wants to answer this? Do you think that everyone in here should be heard individually? I don't know how that would happen.
Thanks, and that is one of the biggest frustrations, quite honestly, because we do want to hear from you, and many of you, I don't know, how many of you, just a show of hands, how many of you came to the Capitol to testify on the House bills?
Couldn't find it. I would've, you know I would've.
To come to the
I
House?
couldn't find, I was having a terrible
Okay,
time.
let me make sure that I make it real clear where it is going to be for the Senate, because this next week, it will be at the, hey Bruce, it will be at the Capitol, and again, starting at 10:30 in the morning. My recommendation is on Monday, tomorrow, or day after tomorrow. Monday, this Monday, the, what is the date on Monday? The 4th of March, that's right. We are in March.
Is there a limited time?
And it will be from 10:30 in the morning until we're done. And I would tell you that if you are wanting to come and be able to have your voice shared, I would suggest you come early and you go in to the committee rooms, and let me tell you those rooms right now.
You're in the old Supreme Court chamber.
Oh, that's right, we're in the old Supreme Court chamber for part of them, and in 356 for the others, and the 356 is up on the 3rd floor. But if you come in early and you sign in, then you will have an opportunity to have your voice heard. Now, I would love to be able to sit down one-on-one with you. And I know before we even started today, I had some really good conversation with several people. Several of you I have had lengthy conversation. And so those are opportunities that are out there. When we have a town hall meeting, the unfortunate thing is that for everybody to say something, we would be here until an eternity. But your voice does matter. And so I would urge you to come to the Capitol to be able to testify, to give your voice. I also would say to you that right now, because I've received, and I know we all have received so very many emails, it's very difficult to get through all of them. And so sometimes the personal note, the personal letter that I get is something that stands out. It's kind of like, how do you jump out on a job application? A personal letter sometimes gives me a little bit more information and understanding as to where you're coming from. I met yesterday off the Senate floor. There were a group of competitive shooters, and there were about, I think there were about 10 of them. And I came off the floor and listened to what their concerns were. And it gives me a broader scope of understanding. And the more I hear, the more difficult it is to make a decision. Quite honestly. Because it is important that we listen, and we listen thoroughly. I will tell you candidly, I'm not a gun person. I don't own a gun. But one of my constituents invited me to go to a shooting range. Took my husband and I to a shooting range. Way, way, way out of my comfort zone. But I did it. And I went. And I was awful. I would be so dangerous with a gun. My husband is military. He's a sharpshooter. He's very good. He hit right on the target. I put more holes in the ceiling and finally said, okay, you've got to keep the gun down. You've got to, that's not a goal that I have, is to do that. And but I would tell you that I think it's important that you know and understand you do have a voice, you do have an opportunity, and even if you don't get to have your say today, please know that your presence makes a difference. And we appreciate very much your coming today.
And let me just clarify a little bit about the logistics around the Capitol. It is not the easiest place to get to or into and out of. But the old Supreme Court chambers is in the Capitol building on the 2nd floor at the north end. There is security coming in, so you do have to go through the security check. And I would suggest that you take public transportation down or park several blocks away and walk, because there's no parking right around the Capitol. Each chair of each committee can set the rules for the public testimony. Almost always, every chair I've seen, and I'm chair of State Affairs, State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee in the House, what we try to do is have everyone have a chance to speak, and what we do is we use a time clock so that we limit the comments to 2 or 3 minutes, depending on how many people are in the room. So I would say you have a 99% chance of being heard. You may not be able to give your 20-minute speech, but you should be able to be heard at one of those committee hearings. So I do encourage you to come down and do that. It is your right, and we have a gavel amendment that requires us to hear every bill. Some legislatures, the committee chair can pocket the bill and it never even sees the light of day. So we hear every single bill that comes through, and that's another good thing about Colorado law. So I just wanted to clarify that if you do come down, give yourself plenty of time and just plan on having somewhat of a hassle getting in and out of the building.
The hearing that took place in the House in the Judiciary Committee that I sit on had to do with the gun legislation. Lasted for 13 hours, so it started at 10 o'clock in the morning and ended 13 hours later. So there was an attempt to hear the people. Now, everyone who wanted to speak did not get heard because there was a limit to, if you go beyond 12 o'clock, then it's a different bill. There's all kinds of rules. I told you that in my introduction. Most people made it within the first 13 hours. So there was an attempt to I want to tell you that the information that we receive is from every point of view. And that we get lots of pertinent information from each of those groups. And then it's not one of those things where you can say, I heard from 13 people on this and 12 people on this. And 12. Our responsibility is to take that information and synthesize it into something that's logical and representative of who we represent and the values of our society and the Constitution. And that's what we're attempting to do. I don't know that I have ever been 100% successful at anything that I've done in my life. But I do the best I can. So with that in mind, that's what we're attempting to do with this.
Thank you, John. We're almost done with this room. Here's another question about guns, just so this gentleman right here is happy with the balance that we're having today. And I think we've answered this, but I'm going to read it. If the stated purpose of proposed gun control bills is to reduce gun violence, why are these bills being railroaded through the General Assembly when there is no empirical data that gun control laws do anything to reduce gun violence? And I think we've had that similar question before. The National Institute of Justice report dated January 2013. That's the end of it. But I think we've heard those questions, and if anybody else wants to elaborate on it, we've got about 2 minutes.
And I wouldn't call railroading. I think there's been a very deliberative process. I made the comment that I wish in many ways, before the legislative session even started, that we would have had this. I wish that we would have been able to have an opportunity to have small group interaction. It's tough to have some of the questions, and I know a couple people have said, well, if we can't do this at a town hall meeting, when can we do it? And again, I am more than open and willing to have those conversations with you after the meeting briefly, and to be able to follow through. What I do want to do is give you information about what the bills are and when they will be heard on Monday, so that if there's a specific bill that you're interested in, Senate Bill 197, which has not been heard in the House, it is a Senate bill, is Senator Hudak, no firearms for domestic violence offenders. I think we probably all can pretty much agree that that will be an interesting bill. House Bill 1224, which did pass from the House, Senator Hodge and Representative Fields, prohibiting large capacity ammunition magazines. That's one that you might for sure want to hear. Senate Bill 196, Senator Morse and Representative Fields, Assault Weapon Responsibility Act. And that again is a new bill that has not been heard in the House, that this will be its first hearing. And I think that probably is going to be one that will bring a large crowd. Senate Bill 195, Senator Choctaw and Representative May, no online training for concealed handgun permits. And those will all be held in the old Supreme Court chambers starting at 10:30. So if the last one of those is the one that you're most interested in, you may not need to get there quite as early. But then in room 356, which is on the 3rd floor. And for all of these, there will be overflow rooms. So there will be other rooms throughout the Capitol that will be an opportunity for you to sit in and listen. And if you have signed up to testify but you can't get in to sit in there, then when it's your turn, they'll call your name and you can get there. And these are House Bill 1229. Again, these three have been heard and passed out of the House. Representative Fields and McCann and Senator Carroll, background checks for gun transfers. This is for private sales. House Bill 1228, Representative Court and Senator Heath, payment for background checks for gun transfers. And House Bill 1226, Representative Levy and Senator Heath, no concealed carry at colleges. So that kind of gives you the overall flow of what those different pieces of legislation are, when they will be heard. If you are not able to come to the Capitol, you can always listen to them online. And you can pull that up on your internet and listen to them at the same time. The other thing I would really urge you to do is if there are 2 or 3 of you that are in agreement of wanting to make a statement, that rather than each one of you coming, saying, I'm coming, but I represent John, Paul, and Mary, and we are all sharing the same view. That way you make sure that you get that view expressed. But again, the thing I would really urge you to do is if you want to have a voice at one of the committee hearings, is that you make sure that you come early enough to be able to sign up for them. I know some of you are going to walk away here and say, you know, Democrats don't listen, Democrats don't care, and I would tell you that we hear from both Democrats and Republicans supporting and opposing these bills. And so it is, in my mind, it is not partisan, and I know that many of you will disagree with me on that. But it is a matter of having an open discussion. And I will tell you that the person who comes to me in civility and has a conversation, I will listen to much more readily than someone who yells at me and who uses foul language or threatens me. Because at that point, I become very tone deaf. And so if you have something to say and you want to share that, I will listen to you. Because I do believe that we need to be sensible in the way we solve some of the issues that are facing our state, and at the same time, give a good broad education for everyone. So again, I'm sorry that we aren't able to go through all the questions. I know that if you did write your name and your email or address, we will try to respond to you, and we will try to get back to you with an answer. And again, would invite you to come to, I have another town hall meeting in March, the 3rd Wednesday, and you have one the 3rd Thursday, and you have one coffee this Monday. So those are opportunities, again, to have those conversations. And again, if there are...
Once that occurs, could you take a poll, since most of us haven't had a chance to have our question answered or say, and take a poll of the crowd and kind of
Give you some information.
You know, just which way are we asking you all to vote on pro or anti-gun bills?
Sure, sure, be glad to do that. So, I don't know how many of you know that much about 197, no firearms for domestic violence offenders. How many of you think someone who is a domestic violence offender should be able to possess a gun? If you're accused,
If you're, in other words, not.
if you have been found guilty, if you've been found,
It's just accused.
This is already a law.
Yes.
It's already a law. So what
okay,
else
if
is
you
in
want to
that
read,
legislation?
this is what's very difficult, because if you haven't read the bill, I'm asking you to vote on a bill that you haven't read, and so, basically, what I would say is, the bill says no firearms for domestic violence offenders.
But if
How many
you
of
read
you-
it, can you tell us what else
Wait,
is
wait a
in
minute.
it?
Let her talk, let her
Okay,
talk.
I'm gonna say,
Let her talk.
this is simply the bill title.
Maybe we should ask who else read the bill.
And I'm sure the majority of you have not read the bill because it's just come out. But again, how many of you would vote for that bill?
How about punishing murderers and no
Excuse
gun
me,
control
I'm going
at
to
all?
ask-
No gun control at all.
Excuse me. Thank you very much for coming today, and we're not going to carry on anymore. I thank you very much, and have a good, safe day.